Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Try to speak a little bit more, please.
How are you today?
Doing well, and I can hear you well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Egypt, I see you, and the floor is yours. You may speak.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, that's good.
Yes, although the camera is not on, you will be keeping it off when you will speak?
Yeah, because I have problems. Once I put the camera on, then I lose the microphone.
Okay, but I can hear you. I can hear you well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Once again, please, if you want to do a test of your microphone and camera, make sure you raise your hand so I can give you the floor, and then we can test.
Should we start?
Yes, we can, according to the schedule, for sure.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call to order this meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation. Distinguished delegates, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It has been well over a year since the world has brought to a standstill by COVID-19. While the harrowing impacts of the pandemic have been different for everyone, we have all lost something. To those who have lost loved ones, you have our deepest condolences. The fight is far from over, but we continue to look forward to the day that we can all meet in person once again. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge all those who we have been lost to COVID-19. Please join me for a moment of silence. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all and to declare open the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation. I wish to thank the Executive Secretary and her staff for excellent preparations made for this meeting. I also wish to thank the Bureau of the Conference of Parties for their support and advice. These virtual formal sessions of our meeting are intended to carry forward the work of the SBI and help maintain momentum towards the 15th meeting of the Conference of Parties and the respective meetings of the parties of the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols. We will also advance our work related to development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. This virtual part of our meeting will include 3 periods of SBI plenary meetings, each consisting of 3 sessions. The first set of SBI plenaries, beginning today, will continue tomorrow and until Tuesday, 18th May. The second set of SBI plenaries will be held from 28th to 30th May, and the third set of SBI plenaries will be held from 11th to 13th June. On June 13th, we will suspend our meeting until we can meet in person or as may be otherwise decided by the COP Bureau. The virtual formal SBI meeting will also include contact group meetings, which will be held on days when plenary is not meeting. Recreating a formal negotiation session in a virtual format will present us with many new challenges, all of which can call for determination, flexibility, and of course, patience. However, in light of the diligence and resolve I have seen this past year, I am confident we will find a way forward together. And distinguished delegates, we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Hamdallah Sedan of Egypt, who will address us on behalf of the COP14 presidency. Dr. Sedan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As the representative of the current president of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention, Egypt, it is an honor for me to join the chair of SBI-3 to welcome you to the 3rd meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, being held online today and in the coming weeks. Allow me to begin by expressing my sympathy and solidarity with all of you, especially those who have lost loved ones or suffered hardship from the impacts of this extraordinary global COVID-19 pandemic. We have come together today for the opening of the 3rd meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation, with a view toward advancing the work and maintaining momentum for the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. This virtual formal meeting of SBI will address a wide range of important agenda items that are essential to the work of the Convention and its protocols. Your work at this meeting will also help advance the development of an ambitious, robust, and transformative post-2020 global biodiversity framework by providing advice to the 3rd meeting of the open-ended working group scheduled for the 2nd to the 7th of August. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the SBI Chair, Charlotte, and the COP Bureau for their guidance in preparing for this meeting, as they demonstrated during the special virtual sessions of the SBI, as well as the informal session of the SBI. They are ready to face any challenge necessary to carry forward the work of the Convention and its protocols. I would like to thank all parties for their flexibility and cooperation in finding a way to allow the Convention to move forward through these virtual meetings while leaving no country behind. Distinguished delegates, this past year has ushered the world into a new and uncertain era, filled with a host of unprecedented and seemingly insurmountable challenges. Nevertheless, if we can collectively navigate this period and maximize every available opportunity to further biodiversity conservation and protection. The coming years will one day be remembered at the time when the world advanced to an entirely new state of being. When we, as a global community, came together to put the world on a path to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature. I would like to thank the SBI Chair, Charlotte, and all members of the SBI Bureau for their leadership in preparing for this virtual session. I would like also to thank the CBD Secretariat and our Executive Secretary, Elizabeth Mrima, for their tireless efforts and outstanding work in preparation and organization of this and other meetings. I am confident this meeting will help advance our work towards COP15, where we aim to adopt a global biodiversity framework for the post-2020 period. I look forward to hearing your views, perspectives, and inspiring discussions. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Sedan, for your remarks. May I offer my sincere thanks for excellent leadership and guidance the government of Egypt have provided while serving as a COP14 presidency. Thank you. I would now like to invite the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity, Ms. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, to deliver her remarks to the subsidiary body on implementation. Ms. Maruma Mrema, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by joining yourself, Madam Chair, and the presidents of our COP Bureau in joining solidarity with all of us or all of you who have suffered in one way or the other as the result of the ongoing pandemic. We know we have lost many lives, socio-economic impacts at individual level, country level. So we are joining solidarity, hoping soon we'll get our way out of this malice. In the meantime, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation to the Convention on Biological Diversity. I'm truly honored, together with my team at the Secretariat, to have continued support, to continue to support your work and preparations for the convening of this meeting. As we continue our journey towards the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties and the adoption of the robust, ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, we will be listening attentively to your debates of the different agenda items for this meeting and the recommendations that will ensue. With my remarks already made at the informal session of the SBI in March, I will therefore hesitate to repeat or say more so as to save time for our deliberation. However, just brief highlights from my side. Our dear Honorable Chair, Charlotte, I would like to sincerely thank you, as well as our colleagues in the COP Bureau, for your outstanding visionary leadership in preparing for this formal online meeting. As we all know, virtual meetings present a host of new challenges that we must all grapple with. Nonetheless, you are to be commended for aiding us to chart new possibilities moving forward. Permit me to equally thank our host country, the Government of Canada, for generously providing us with additional financial resources needed for our virtual meetings, including the services of our dedicated team of volunteers. From all of us, Thank you for your continued and unwavering support. Distinguished delegates, more than 1,830 participants had registered for this online meeting, representing 128 countries with over 1,140 registered participants and over 190 registered observer organizations. This clearly shows the attention given by the global community on the issues to be discussed in the coming days. I hope and trust all of them and more are present today and or will be in the days to come. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you all and encourage your active engagement in the deliberations of our meeting. Dear participants, there is a familiar saying that before anything else, preparation is key to success, and you indeed come prepared. You have participated in the special virtual sessions of the SBI as well as informal session of SBI. At the informal session, we heard initial views of parties and observers on most of the agenda items and received many valuable comments through the statements and written submissions. The Secretariat has collected them all and will take them into account when supporting the SBA chair in developing conference room papers. At this session of SBI, we will consider as many as about 18 agenda items, including vital documents, which will help to develop important long-awaited advice for the co-chairs of the Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, who I know are eagerly waiting for your contribution. I wish you all success in your deliberations in the coming days, and I urge you to keep in mind that this is a moment of truth for people and planet alike. We need to work together to protect the natural systems that support us all. For the sake of future generations, for our children and grandchildren, we must take another step forward toward a safer, more sustainable and equitable path. In closing, Madam Chair, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to our colleagues and partners for their support and contributions to the preparation of some documents for a number of agenda items. More so, before I close, I must recognize and sincerely thank my colleagues at the Secretariat or Secretariat staff. This past year to date has not been easy. My team has faced countless new challenges and demands, not mentioning the stressful working environment from home. Nonetheless, they have worked tirelessly and diligently to ensure that all preparations were completed and ready to support your discussions, and they will continue to do so. However, I will urge for empathy and flexibility on your demands to the Secretariat as we do our best to respond to them within the existing constraints. I look forward to hearing your views and perspectives in the coming weeks. With the support of the Secretariat and the guidance of the SBI Chair and the COP Bureau, I'm sure this meeting will help us advance the further development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as our preparations for the Conference of the Parties 15. I wish you all a successful meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Maruma Mrema, for your warm welcome. And also, I would like to reiterate my gratitude to you and your team for your hard work in preparing for this meeting. I look forward to your continued support in facilitating this meeting. Thank you so much. Distinguished delegates, we now move to agenda item 2, adoption of agenda and organization of work. At this meeting held on 22nd April, the Bureau designated Mr. Eric Manning-Okori of Ghana to act as Rapporteur. I take it that this is agreeable to a meeting. Thank you. I thank Eric for agreeing to assume this responsibility, and I look forward to working with him in the coming weeks. And I now, if I can invite him to take place on this virtual podium with agenda item.
I'm afraid there are some technical issues with his camera, so he won't be able to switch that on.
Okay, but I'm sure you will hopefully see him later on. But thank you very much, Eric. Distinguished delegates, let me draw your attention to a provisional agenda prepared by the Executive Secretary in consultation with the Bureau. The revised provisional agenda contained in document CBD/SBI/3/1 has been cleared by the Bureau. Can I take it that the meeting can adopt the agenda? I see no objections, so the agenda is adopted. The proposed organizational work for this meeting has been developed pursuant to a mandate given by the joint session of the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties on the Subsidiary, which requested me, with the support of the Secretariat, to develop a proposed organizational work for the formal session of the third meeting of SBI. The organizational work was subsequently considered and adjusted by the Bureau of the Conference of Parties at its meeting on 8 April 2021 and is set out in the annex to the scenario note contained in document CBD/SBI/3/1/add2, which provides detailed information on how we will proceed. The COP Bureau has also considered the organization of the first reading for Agenda Item 8, Cooperation. As the pre-session document was posted online on 10th of May, the Bureau has decided to defer first reading of Agenda Item 8 to the third session of SBI-3. That would be during 11th to 13th of June. This will allow for more time for parties to review the document in advance of its first reading. Specific date and time will be announced later. The scenario note supports that annotated provisional agenda for the third meeting of SBI as contained in document CBD/SBI/3/1/add1/rev2. Before we begin, I would like to highlight the key principles for organization of this formal meeting as follows. The timing and modalities for organization of the meeting respond to the current extraordinary circumstances as related to the COVID-19 pandemic and do not set the precedent for organization of similar meetings under the Convention on Biological Diversity in the future. The timing and modalities have also been designed keeping in mind the time frame for preparations necessary to conduct COP15 in October 2021 and the third meeting of an open-ended working group in August 2021. We have also made every effort to organize a meeting to allow for full and effective participation of parties, as well as full engagement of all observers by holding the meetings in a transparent, fair, and inclusive manner. Let me also note that the adoption of L documents will be deferred to a later date as decided by the Bureau. For items that are needed to feed into the post-2020 process, I will convey the results to the co-chairs of the working group. I would also ask that you keep in mind that the standard rules of procedure used for physical meetings will apply, and their application will be adapted as necessary for virtual meetings. And I would also like to highlight the two types of sessions we will convene during this formal meeting. Plenary. First, we will convene plenary sessions to open, adjourn and suspend the meeting, adopt the agenda and organizational work, and elect officers. In addition, we will complete the first reading of agenda item as needed, establish contact groups, and request the preparation of CRPs or non-papers as appropriate. Plenary meetings will also be used for stock-taking or to review the progress of contact groups and to provide further guidance to the work. Plenary meetings will also be used to consider and approve CRPs. Plenary meetings will last 3 hours with a 15-minute break, approximately midway through each session. Only one plenary session will be held per day. The default time is 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time. As we discussed during our informal SBI session, it is envisaged that the formal first reading of agenda items would take into account and build upon the statements and submissions made at the informal meeting, thus reducing the time needed for the first reading for most agenda items. Therefore, statements made in the informal session will be taken into account in the preparations of the CRPs and non-papers for the meeting unless parties, governments or observers indicate that new points are to be added to these statements. As is our usual practice, only points made in plenary will be taken up in subsequent stages of our work on the item concerned. Also, during plenary meeting, statements by parties and other governments are limited to 3 minutes and 5 minutes for those made on behalf of regional groups. For major group, statements are limited to 4 minutes and for other observers to 2 minutes. I also wish to remind that any specific proposal for textual amendments from observer need to be supported by at least one party. I will call upon parties to indicate their support through the chat box as needed. And then we do have contact groups, and I would like to say a few words about contact groups as well. On the basis of a first reading, I will seek to establish contact groups and clearly define the terms of reference and mandate for their work. I will also nominate the chairs or co-chairs of each contact group. The contact group will carry out its mandate on the basis of statements made in plenary. Delegates should refrain from bringing new issues to contact groups that have not been aired in the plenary beforehand. Sessions of contact groups will last up to 3 hours. 1 or 2 contact groups will be held per day as required, but at different time in the day, in an effort to share the burden across time zones. No parallel session of 2 contact groups will be organized. Contact groups would be open to participation of all parties, other governments and representatives of the servers. Contact groups may work on the basis of a non-paper. However, I may decide to convene initial session of a contact group prior to formulating a non-paper. Regular updates of a non-paper would be made available to all participants in the contact group to ensure transparency and sufficient time will be provided between sessions of a group to allow for review of a draft and bilateral and group consultations. I may also convene other types of informal groups, such as Friends of a Chair, and share the modalities for their organizations with the parties. And finally, contact groups and other types of informal groups who work in English, and accordingly non-papers considered at the meeting of a group will be in English. As per usual practice, the outcome of a contact group would be provided in all languages for consideration by the plenary as CRPs. And if I go back to the scenario note, I would also once again draw your attention to important information contained in the scenario note. Please read it carefully. The scenario note provides detailed information regarding the consideration of CRPs. I shall note that the Secretariat will make all efforts to ensure that all CRPs are available as early as possible in advance of their consideration by the plenary and not less than 36 hours in advance in all 6 languages. The scenario note also contains the timeline of plenary meetings and contact groups, which is subject to further refinement in the light of the progress of a meeting and guidance by the Bureau. I should note that items directly related to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework are addressed early in the timeline, as they need to be completed by the end of May 2021 to inform development of a first draft in the framework in time for the 3rd meeting of the working group. In addition, the scenario note includes helpful information on the linkages between the framework and other issues for the SBI, as well as a reminder that the co-chairs of the open-ended working group have identified a set of questions for which they are seeking inputs from SBI. With this explanation, I submit the organizational work for approval. I see no objections, so the organizational work is approved. Thank you. And before we proceed, I would like to suggest that in order to make efficient use of time and allow more time for discussions, we refrain from making individual statements to thank or congratulate the chair, countries that supported this meeting, or the Secretariat. Therefore, I would like to invite the Rapporteur to make a statement of thanks on behalf of all the participants so that this can be avoided in the individual interventions. I also invite the Rapporteur to update you on how we'll handle the report from different session SBI. So I ask the Rapporteur, Eric, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of all the participants at this meeting, I take this opportunity to congratulate the chair of the subsidiary body and members of the Bureau for their hard work in preparing for the formal session of SBI-3. And I wish you the best of success for this meeting. On behalf of all of us, I thank the Executive Secretary and her team for the preparations for the SBI. I also thank the Government of Canada for providing funding for this important meeting. I have no doubt that our deliberations will be very productive. I would like to update you on how we will handle the report from the different sessions of SBI. At the end of the 3rd plenary on June 13th, we will approve the report for this first part of the meeting. With the assistance of the Secretariat, the report will be prepared by me. The report will be basically procedural, noting the opening of the meeting, the agenda items addressed, and the suspension of the meeting. The report will note the parties and observers that have made interventions as the usual practice. In the report, we will note the status of documents prepared, indicating any CRPs that may have been approved. It will also note that the final outcomes, that is consideration of the LDOTs, will be deferred to a later resumed session to be held in person. The report may also note any procedural requests to the Secretariat for intersessional work, that is, within the framework of the existing mandates for the preparation of the Working Group 2023 and the COPMO. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Eric. Before we begin, I would like to invite the Secretariat to provide some information on the organizational work for these sessions, followed by some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good day to everyone. As you are here, you have successfully joined this session, but I wish to point out that to join all plenary sessions, you will always need to connect through the SBI homepage on the CBD website by clicking Join or through the meeting calendar. We ask you not to save the Interactio link into your browser, as plenaries and contact groups are different meetings. Therefore, we ask you always join the meeting from the SBI homepage. Then from the calendar, select the session you wish to attend, followed by the type of connection you need for this session, whether it is speaker or viewer. As you have been informed through the scenario note, plenary sessions will be recorded and streamed online. Statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of delivery. However, they will be posted on the website only after delivery. In any case, statements, as well as any associated recommendations for text changes, must be posted within 12 hours of the closure of an agenda item if they are to be considered in the further work of the body on that item. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. All plenary sessions will last 3 hours per day and will be held from 7 to 10 a.m. Montreal time, with a 15-minute break approximately midway through each session. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before start time. As per the informal sessions in February and March, the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before plenary. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other government stakeholder groups or other observers will be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda item from parties and observers will be limited. Statements will be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of regions, 3 minutes for individual parties. For major groups, each statement is limited to 4 minutes, and for individual other governments and other observers to 2 minutes as time allows. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statement, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. There will be no general, regional, or group statements during the opening session of the meeting. Each agenda item will start with a short introduction of the item by the Secretariat. Regions may provide their statements on each agenda item. The list of all pre-registered participants is available online at the link you can see on the screen. Regarding the use of the online system, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list visible to the chair. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication, mainly regarding any need for technical support, and therefore to keep your remarks here short. The time for statements is limited, so a clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading, as it will be a challenge for interpreters to follow. Please note that towards the mid-session, the chair will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need for you to log off during this time. Finally, in our effort to continuously improve our services to participants, the Secretariat is pleased to inform you that a virtual display table is at your disposal for the duration of the meetings. Parties and observers are invited to make use of the display table to share publications, information materials, and events that relate to issues being addressed by SUBSA-24 and SBI-3. To consult these announcements and for information on how to submit an announcement, click on the tab Virtual Display Table located on the right-hand side of the web portal of the SUBSA and SBI meetings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Colleagues, with this, we will now begin our consideration of our first substantive agenda item. I now invite the delegates to turn to agenda item 3 on review of progress in the implementation of a convention and the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011 to 2020. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 8, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 23 parties and regional groups and 6 observers with 1 additional written submission. I will give the floor to the Secretariat to give an introduction to the agenda item and to the documents. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 10/2, the Conference of the Parties decided that at its future meetings, it would review progress in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and requested the Executive Secretary to prepare an analysis/synthesis of national, regional, and other actions, including targets as appropriate, established in accordance with the strategic plan to enable the Conference of the Parties to assess the contribution of such national and regional targets to the global targets. In response to this decision and related subsequent decisions, the Conference of the Parties, at each of its meetings since COP10, has reviewed progress in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 on the basis of, among other things, the national reports and national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Further, in Decision 14/18, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to undertake a review of the implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action in order to identify gaps, best practices, and lessons learned. In light of these decisions, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD/SBI-3/2, Review of Progress in the Implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. This document contains a suggested recommendation for the consideration of the subsidiary body. This document is also supported by 4 addenda. Add 1, update on progress in revising/updating and implementing national biodiversity strategies and action plans, including national targets. Add 2, analysis of the contribution of targets established by parties and progress towards the Aichi biodiversity targets. Add 3, review of implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action. And add 4, progress towards Aichi biodiversity target 18 on traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use of biodiversity. Documents add 1 and add 2 were previously made available for peer review. The comments received were taken into account in the finalization of documents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Before I open the floor for interventions, in order to increase efficiency and stay within the very limited time we have, I would ask those parties and observers that delivered a statement on this item at the informal session to take the floor only in the event that you wish to add something to your previous intervention. In developing the CRP, all the comments and suggestions made in your statement, whether in March or today, will be considered carefully. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, and observers will be heard as time allows. And before we begin, I would also like to welcome our dedicated interpreters who work so hard to ensure that we all understand each other. To assist them in their important work and also to ensure that all other delegates can follow the meetings effectively, I ask that you keep your interventions to a time limit while speaking slowly and clearly. In particular, please pause between sentences. I would now like to open the floor for interventions on Agenda Item 3, on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. I will start with regional groups, followed by parties, other governments, and observers. And I encourage you to keep your statements short and concise. I now open the floor for statement from regions. And maybe Secretariat can help me if there is any statement from the African region.
I think the Democratic Republic of Congo has uploaded a statement on behalf of the region, so maybe they could be given the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. The Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor. If you may raise your hand. No? Okay, maybe we can continue and see if there is any who would like to give a regional statement from the CE region. No? Then I continue and ask if there is a regional statement from the EU. No? You're very efficient. It's very good. I think everything was said at the informal session. From the GRULAC region? No? And finally from the Jaskans region? No, okay. Very good. We can continue like this. We maybe can finalize our agenda for today. Thank you very much. I will now move to interventions from parties. If you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. See if I can, before we start, if we have the clock on the screen. The timer. Here it is, yes, thank you very much. Okay, I will start with, I will start with, I think Norway was first and then Argentina. I start with Norway and then Argentina. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The need to strengthen implementation should be at the center of discussion leading up to Kunming. This is a vital message underlined by GBO5, and that resonates well with this agenda item. We refer to our statement made during the informal meetings of the SBI and reiterate the following points where we now will submit text changes. It is not only biodiversity that will be suffering if the implementation does not significantly improve. This will also undermine other goals, such as the temperature goals in the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Secondly, SBI will play an important role in providing input to the open-ended working group for the development of a strengthened implementation mechanism post-2020 under Agenda Item 9. This should be reflected in the decision text under this agenda item. Lastly, we underline the importance of involving indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making processes and in the development of indicators for the post-2020 framework. We also encourage parties to put measures in place to enhance awareness and understanding of gender and biodiversity linkages. We need everyone to provide input to the cocktail that will make up the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Norway. And we will continue with Argentina, followed by Malaysia and South Africa. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This
agenda item is highly relevant. The HA targets represented a strategic, ambitious plan in keeping with the Convention's objectives. We, the parties, have enthusiastically included them in our national strategies and used them to guide us in our implementation of the CBD. However, as indicated in this document, these HA targets have not been able to be achieved. Thus, it is very important for this subsidiary body to acknowledge in its recommendations the lessons learned from the last 10 years. And that is why Argentina has suggestions to include additional considerations in the draft recommendation. Firstly, we believe it is relevant to welcome the analysis of the national strategies, since this work highlights the parties' implementation efforts. We also suggest that we should reiterate that implementation of the strategic plan depended on capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation, and resource mobilization as set forth in Decision 10/2. Finally, we recommend that the most important conclusions from the Secretariat's review should be included in the body of the draft recommendation, especially regarding the fact that one of the big problems with IHE implementation was the lack of resources in developing countries, and thus it is essential that the recommendation recognises the need for enhanced implementation support for the Global South, including scientific technical cooperation, capacity building, technology transfer, and a substantial increase in resource mobilisation. As has already been pointed out by Norway, Madam Chair, we will submit our proposed amendments in writing, and we hope that the draft recommendation spirit will thus ensure that the experience of the last decade be fully taken into account to produce the post-2020 framework take up the challenge of halting biodiversity loss. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. And I will continue with Malaysia, followed by South Africa and Cambodia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, Malaysia would like to offer our view on the past implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and share some lessons learned for the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The development of Malaysia's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan as a response to the Aichi biodiversity targets started in 2014. Given the multidisciplinary nature of biodiversity, consultations involving multiple stakeholders, including government, non-government, and indigenous peoples, were carried out. As a result, the National Policy on Biological Diversity 2016 to 2025 was promulgated to guide biodiversity plans and programs in Malaysia into the next decade. We have come to a midpoint of this plan with our sixth national report has detailed the achievements and challenges of our national policy. Distinguished delegates, it is our pleasure to share that Malaysia has taken proactive steps to review the policy. In this regard, Malaysia supports maintaining the use of MBSAP as the primary monitoring and reporting document to the CBD and further stresses the need for flexibility with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Malaysia also supports the increased involvement of non-governmental actors in the formulation and implementation of MBSAPs, given that biodiversity is not only a shared heritage, but also a shared responsibility. We call upon greater financial support from the private and financial sectors and to enhance mainstreaming in the implementation of MBSAPs as biodiversity underpins other sectors of the economy. It is also Malaysia's position that the limited delivery of financial resources, capacity building, and technology transfer will threaten the full and effective implementation of respective NBSAPs. Therefore, we urge that sufficient resources are provided to developing countries by developed countries or global financial mechanisms in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Cambodia and Uganda. South Africa, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Africa welcomes the review of implementation of the post-of 2011-2020 strategic plan and the IT biodiversity targets, and view it as very important and crucial to provide guidance in setting the ambition for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Of great concern to us, Madam Chair, are the gaps that have been identified, such as the late or non-submission of the NBSUPs, the late or non-submission of the national reports, as well as the national targets that are set to be significantly lower than the global targets. It is quite unfortunate, Madam Chair, that the convention itself doesn't have powers to enforce this level of commitment, because it's more commitment to the parties to submit NBSUPs and reports quite in time to allow the analysis of these documents. These are the challenges, Madam Chair, we need to take into account when setting the global targets for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, and use them as lessons learned from the previous decade. South Africa has the following suggestions to make to the draft decision, particularly to ensure that the concerns raised in the analysis in the review are addressed. For the draft decision to the subsidiary body on implementation, we had a comment on paragraph 4, where there is a mention of national targets and
I think we lost South Africa. Is South Africa still online? No? Maybe we can come back to South Africa so they can complete their intervention. And we continue with Cambodia, and then see if we can come back to South Africa. Cambodia, you have the floor.
Of our statement made during the informal sessions on 8 March under this agenda item 3, and would like to add as below. Cambodia supports suggested recommendation in document CBD/SBI-3/2 with request for COP15 to consider adoption of any effective strategies/mechanisms for resources mobilization to further implementation of not succeeded target, as well as for 2020 GBF, especially for the investment in HC2 conservation facility, for the effective implementation of IT biodiversity target 13 under the strategic goal C. However, in the suggested recommendation 6 in document CBD/SBI/3/2, we would like to request the inclusion of youth participation before the word traditional knowledge to ensure all relevant groups are adequately reflected in the implementation of the convention or in national biodiversity strategy and action plans. Thank you, Madam Chair. We will submit our amendment in writing.
Thank you, Cambodia. I will now go back to South Africa if you would like to finalize your statement. South Africa, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
I don't know, where did I break, Madam?
Well, you were just about to tell us about an amendment on para 4.
Oh, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
So please, we're all very interested, so please tell us.
Thank you very much. In paragraph 4, there is a mention of national targets and commitments. And our view is that national targets and commitments mean the same thing. And we wanted clarity or clarification on what difference does this paragraph put to national targets and commitments. We would really appreciate that clarification. Our next comment is on paragraph 1, on the decisions to the Conference of the Parties, where it is indicated, take note of, and then it carries on, and we would request that we use welcomes, because it's a very important action. The updated analysis, it needs to be welcomed and taken note of. And throughout the document, there is a mention of national targets and commitments, and we would like that to be clarified and revised if possible. And there is also that in paragraph 4 of the draft decisions to the Conference of the Parties. And to accommodate the challenges that were outlined in the documents presented for this agenda item, we suggest an introduction of an additional paragraph 7, which reads as, urges parties to set national targets through their NB subs that are aligned and commensurate with the global level of ambition. Madam Chair, we are raising this because it was indicated in the analysis and the review of 2011-2020 strategic plan that the targets, most of the targets that are reflected, the national targets that are reflected in the NB subs are not commensurate with the global targets, and that results in them collectively not adding up to the global target. So we believe if we introduce this paragraph, it will reinforce that all the parties should ensure that their national targets are set to be aligned or closer, as close as possible to the global targets. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. I will now give the floor to Uganda, followed by Brazil and Ecuador. Uganda, I think, yes. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda reiterates its submission during the informal session, but has made some adjustments to the submission that was previously sent. So Uganda agrees with the document CBD SBI-3/2 that NSAP should have enhanced integration of gender values and needs. However, Uganda goes further by proposing that the NBSAP should enhance sector-wide integration and inclusion of other segments within the human society, especially the needs of the women, the young people, and indigenous and local communities. Likewise, Uganda proposes the globalization and institutionalization of the VPR methodology in the review of and reporting on NBSAPs in order to ensure effective stakeholder participation and inclusiveness. Notably, Uganda has, of course, as a beneficiary of the VPR methodology, has been both a reviewer and a reviewed party in terms of peer learning, capacity building, and experience sharing for continuous improvement in the implementation and review of the NBSAPs. Therefore, the post-2020 global biodiversity framework should consider the institutionalization of the VPR methodology and mechanism within the agreed principles and objectives. Then also Uganda argues the global formats and information therein and timing and approaches for the review of progress and reporting of the NBSAP to promote transparency and accountability for effectiveness in the review of progress. Besides, uniformity in formats, timing, and approaches in the review process would ease work for the Secretariat and the COP at large. In conclusion, Madam Chair, Uganda supports the suggested recommendations and calls for enhanced resource mobilization, institutional capacity building and development, technology transfer, technical and scientific cooperation, and science policy interface in the implementation of the NBSAPs. In this regard, Uganda aligns itself to the Africa group that supports the goal that will ensure means of implementation is available by all parties to achieve all goals and targets of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The formal submission has already been uploaded to the website. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. I will now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Ecuador. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a pleasure to see you again and to take part in today's formal session. In line with the statement presented during the informal session, Brazil would like to reaffirm that assessing the major challenges in the implementation of the Convention and its strategic plan is an essential step to achieve a balanced, realistic, and ambitious post-2020 GBF. In this regard, Brazil believes the document SBI-3/2 should emphasize that the lack of adequate means of implementation has been a major obstacle in the implementation of CBD and its strategic plan, especially for developing countries. This should be recognized as the main reason why national targets set by parties have not been commensurate with the level of ambition set out in the IT targets. Therefore, the recommendations should highlight that more efforts are needed to mobilize resources to developing countries as a way to fully implement the Convention and the post-2020 GBF, in accordance with Article 20 of the Convention and with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which should be clearly reflected in document SBI-3/2. Accordingly, there is an urgent need for enhanced transparency and accountability in international biodiversity funding, thus requiring adequate indicators on resource mobilization. We must also stress the need to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation and increase capacity building and technology transfer as well. Furthermore, Brazil is of the view that the suggested recommendations should recall COP Decision 10/2, which acknowledges that the strategic plan and its IT targets constitute a flexible framework to national and regional targets, which should be developed in accordance with the national priorities and capacities and take into account both the global targets and the trends of biological diversity in the country. Finally, Brazil takes note with concern of the monitoring and reporting burden placed on parties, especially developing countries, which have been the major cause for delays in submitting national reports and the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. Those delays are an important reminder of the need for flexibility in developing options for enhancing reporting and monitoring, which must consider flexible approaches and take into account different national circumstances and capabilities. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I hope to take part.
Thank you, Brazil. And finally, on my list of parties, I have Ecuador. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora copresidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ecuador would like to highlight that in its national biodiversity strategy and also in the action plan 2050 to 2030, we're very much trying to fulfill the Aichi targets, and we've made important progress in the implementation of lots of different targets and goals with our necessary budgetary resources and some international contributions. For example, with target 11, dealing to 17% of protected land areas and 10% of marine areas, which have actually been exceeded thanks to our national system of protected areas in Ecuador. In spite of the progress that has been made, we consider that there's still a big gap when it comes to having full implementation of the NBSAPs. Thus, there needs to be an increase in funding. We need to more capacity building, more scientific cooperation and technology transfer from developed countries and international organizations and other relevant actors. in order to deal with the challenges arising from the pandemic and also the future targets to be set in post-2020. And that is in line with what has been mentioned by Brazil and Argentina. Turning now to the recommendations for the SBI and COP. We need to take account of the verbs used for paragraphs 4, 5 and 6 because they don't necessarily line up with what we need to have in a recommendation. So we have some changes to make. So at the start of paragraph 4, we would suggest that we note or express concern as regards the targets and then continue with the text. And at the beginning of paragraph 5, we would suggest that express concern about the partial implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action and eliminate the phrase that says has not been fully implemented. And then continue with the original text. Then at the beginning of paragraph 6, we would suggest expresses concern that, and then continue with the text. Then finally in paragraph 6, we suggest that we should include areas before we talk about national biodiversity strategies and action plans so that we don't make this too general, because we believe that some national strategies have actually adequately reflected the participation of Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ecuador. And please let me just remind all speakers to speak us in a slow down so it will be easier to follow for our interpreters. Thank you very much for your cooperation. I now see that the Democratic Republic of Congo is back online. If you would like to make a statement, is it for the African region or for a national statement? And then I do have Peru. No, the Democratic Republic of Congo disappeared again. Okay, I do have Peru on my list. Peru, you have the floor.
Could you hear me? Yes?
I can hear you. Please, go ahead.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Peru congratulates the Executive Secretary for this document. And this assessment shows the scenarios and lessons that need to be corrected during the present exercise when we're setting the new biodiversity global framework. Just a moment, sorry here, says the speaker. We know that the information assessed shows some time lag because we were not able to work on standardization of the information to be reported, which has made it more difficult to carry out the analysis as indicated in the document. So we agree so that we need to have more in-depth analysis of under the deliberations under item 9. And then when it comes to the review of the Gender Action Plan 2015-2020, we agree that the actions should be tangible and well focused so that we can promote conservation and sustainable use of the various components of biodiversity at a national level. Peru also recognises that progress has been made in achieving Target 18 for biodiversity, but it is necessary to step up efforts for the mainstreaming and also the inclusion of Indigenous peoples and local communities and their collective actions and knowledge in favour of promoting the Convention's objectives. However, we do take note that they're considered as an underused resource by many parties. So we agree that it is an opportunity for the IPLCs to be able to reach their full potential as partners in the implementation of the Convention. Peru has identified the lessons that it has learned as regards the NBSAP, national reports, capacity building and resource mobilization, and all of these are important means for having successful implementation of the Convention. Thus, together with our National Strategic Planning Centre, we're drawing up a policy called the National Biodiversity Strategy, which will be turned into an instrument that will regulate the management of biodiversity with a whole of government approach, in order to guarantee that the targets, commitments, and the ambitions established by the parties at a national level are commensurate with the global framework. In order to do that, we need to have permanent support when it comes to capacity building, to develop joint efforts and establish partnerships at all levels in order to ensure the mainstreaming of biodiversity across all government sectors, as well as social and economic sectors, and make synergies possible when it comes to the national implementation of the various multilateral environmental agreements. Madam Chair, Peru would like to finish by actually sending in a table that gives our technical details related to this document for you to consider. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Peru. I see no more requests from parties to the floor, so I will open the floor for other governments. I see no requests from the floor from other governments, so I will now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of major groups or stakeholders. Each statement should not exceed 4 minutes. And as said before, please think about to speak slowly. So I will start by open the floor for on behalf of IPLCs. Viviana Figuera from RMIB LLC. Is she on the floor? If she could raise her hand. IPLCs. No, no raised hand yet. Okay, if I, on behalf of the women's organization, NGO Farn, if you raise the hand, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning from Buenos Aires. My name is Ana Di Pangracio. I'm speaking on behalf of the Women's Caucus. On document SBI-3/2, Section 2, conclusion, we have on paragraph 22, page 6, that reads the last line, parties may wish to further reflect on these lessons during their considerations of Agenda Item 9. We suggest a new addition point that would be M, that would read as follows. The need for supporting and strengthening gender-responsive actions in implementation and mainstreaming of gender issues in biodiversity policy frameworks. This is taken into consideration Section 3, Progress in Implementing the Gender Plan of Action, and document SBI-3/2/3, Review of Implementation of the 2015-2020 Gender Plan of Action, which we would like to see acknowledged and reflected in Section 2 conclusion to further provide guidance and consider it adequately in also Section 3 suggested recommendations. We welcome support from parties and we thank parties who have acknowledged the need for considering gender responsiveness in the global biodiversity framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, women. And I now see that IPLC's IIFB has raised your hand, so if you can come back and make your statement from IPLCs, you have the floor. IIFB, you have the floor.
¿Escucha? Can you hear me? Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm taking the floor on behalf of the IIFB and also the Indigenous Women's Network on Biodiversity. We're aware of the fact that there are time limits in the plenary session, so we're just taking the floor to inform you that our position is the same as the one we expressed in the informal session in March 2021 on agenda item 3 when it comes to progress and implementation of the Convention and the strategic plan for biodiversity. And the same thing applies to item 5 and also resource mobilisation and the financial mechanism. But we would like to highlight something. We think that there needs to be stronger wording in paragraph 6. We have noted this with concern where it says that there's been encouraging progress, but we think that it should say the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities and traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use are not adequately reflected in the implementation of the Convention or in national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So we would encourage the parties to consider this in the analysis and take up new measures to deal with the concerns that are expressed when applying the new post-2020 global diversity framework. We'd also like to encourage the parties so that they support Indigenous peoples for organising dialogues at a national level on the achievements of the NBSAP and in particular National Biodiversity Strategy 2011-2020, in particular Target 18. But I'd also like to ask the Executive Secretary to organise with Indigenous peoples international dialogues on progress made on Target 18. And finally, we'd like to invite the Executive Secretary to organise dialogues with Indigenous women on the new Gender Action Plan. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, IFB. And I will now give the floor to the youth. And I think it's Global Youth Biodiversity Network. Speak on behalf of youth. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So we as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network have been closely following the process of the development of the post-2020 framework since the beginning. Throughout, we have put significant effort into bringing forth the voices of youth and into providing substantial contributions to the discussions despite the challenges. While we will do the same for these sessions as well, we would like to begin by clearly stating that the current state of the virtual negotiations are impacting the ability of many stakeholders and the right holders, as well as several parties to participate fully, effectively, and meaningfully. This includes, but is not limited to, unequal access to broadband internet and relevant devices, the time limitations for stakeholders to contribute to the discussions, as well as challenges with time zones. If serious efforts are not taken to address these equity challenges, we express our concerns on how impactful the outcomes of these meetings and the overall framework could be. We also take this instance to reinforce that all statements made on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network at the informal sessions remain valid, and we request that they be taken on board in the development of CRPs. We invite you to revisit those statements as they lay down our demands for systemic changes that must be put in motion if we are to learn from past lessons in implementation and bend the curve of biodiversity loss. In addition to those points, we have comments on the draft recommendations for this item. We believe that the draft recommendations in document SBI-3/2 fall short of putting down renewed commitments by the parties to learn from the very concerning lack of progress toward existing commitments. With this, we propose the following additional paragraph to the end of this document. Paragraph 7 commits to take the lessons learned from past inefficiencies in the implementation of the Strategic Plan 2011 to 2020 into enhancing the implementation of the Convention and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. GYBN believes that national targets must commensurate with global targets, and we support South Africa's proposal in this regard. We also believe that youth engagement in biodiversity decision-making and implementation should be institutionalized through youth-led structures at the national level in order for countries to take into account the multiple youth-led actions and initiatives in developing MBSEPs and its national reporting. Finally, we reinforce that parties have substantive obligations to turn these commitments into action. While we recognize, appreciate, and support good practices when they happen, the vicious cycle of the same unmet commitments and the same empty expressions of concern for the state of nature and the same inefficient progress year after year, a cycle that has been going on for the past decades, must stop now. For a future of living in harmony with nature and on this International Day of Biological Diversity, we implore you to stop the same. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Youth. And I now give the floor to the CBD Alliance. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe you can hear me well. Saludos.
I can hear you well.
Saludos a todas, a todes y a todos.
Good morning to everyone.
Of the CBD Alliance, which gathers a diverse range of views and proposals from civil society. A more profound analysis of the structural causes of why parties have failed to fulfill IG targets is required, together with the strategies to avoid further failure. For example, recent analysis in 9 different countries showed that corporate capture of policymaking was a key obstacle to implementing IG Target 3 on perverse incentives. As a result, an estimated $4 to $6 trillion continues to be spent on perverse incentives that harm biodiversity, including in sectors like the livestock and bioenergy sector. Only by ensuring public policy making is independent from private sector and commercial interests, we can pursue the genuine transformational change essential to accomplish our common objectives. There is also concern that governments have focused too much on low-hanging fruit like establishing conventional protected areas, while they're prioritizing support for conservation measures that have been more equitable, sustainable, and resilient, like indigenous peoples and local community conserved territories and areas and other forms of collective action, based on traditional knowledge and value systems. Also, and despite the adoption of the Gender Action Plan, the valuable role and rights of women in biodiversity conservation are hardly recognized and even less supported and mainstreamed. Gender action continues to be a lonely pillar rather than an integrated element in all biodiversity policies. Rooted power imbalances and lack of respect of the rights of and role of IPLCs and women and their equitable participation in decision-making have been key obstacles to implementing IG targets related to equitable governance of conserved areas and traditional knowledge, and it is important these obstacles are addressed in any future strategic plan. In terms of implementation, the financial mechanism of the CBD, the GEF, has not always been fully aligned with the CBD COP guidance, and it has even financed projects that are exceptionally harmful to biodiversity. We can give examples of that upon request. As we learned from the GBO, existing CBD decisions, including the IG targets, are still not complied with. We urge governments to focus on this implementation gap, especially now that the dramatic COVID-19 crisis will most likely make it impossible to organize normal face-to-face negotiations. With the current GBF draft, we risk serious regression from previous CBD decisions and the undermining of the basic CBD text and the 3 objectives of the Convention. We need to use this extra time to move ahead full speed towards meeting the IG targets and prepare for an inclusive, balanced, equitable, and transparent negotiation process for the robust, effective, and aspiring post-2020 GBF. We continue to believe that formal virtual negotiations disadvantage most developing countries and civil society, particularly IPLCs, small farmers, women, and youth, adding to inequities in multilateral negotiations and other global injustices. However, we participate in good faith in order to amplify the voices of the disadvantaged. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, CBD Alliance. I would like to see if somebody would like to speak on behalf of some national and local governments. No? I see no hand raised. Okay, I will now open the floor for interventions from observers. And you have 2 minutes for your statements. As was the case for parties, I will request those organizations that took the floor during our March informal meetings to refrain from doing so unless essential to bring new issues to our attention. Rest assured that the statements made in March are available to be taken into account by parties. And I see if anybody has raised their hand. Yes, RGR, IRSS, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Abdoulaye Diabate, researcher at the Institut de Recherche en Sciences de la Santé in Burkina Faso, a member of Target Malaria not-for-profit research consortium, developing new genetic technology for controlling malaria mosquitoes in Africa. We are a member of the Outreach Network for Gene Drive Research, and I'm speaking on behalf of the network. I would like to address items 4 and 5 of the SBA agenda. It is important that the post-2020 framework places strong emphasis on the implementation
Excuse me, I think we're now on agenda item 3, so maybe you can, unless you are you talking about agenda item 3 or 4?
I'm talking about agenda item 4 and 5.
Okay, then I would suggest you come back when we have started those agenda items, because now we're only taking interventions on agenda item 3. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Really? Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Right.
Please come back. We know now that you would like to raise your floor.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome.
I see no request from observers on agenda item 3. No? Okay, thank you very much. So I see no more requests for the floor, and thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on agenda item 3, review of progress in implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020. I see that we have a lot of common understanding on the draft recommendations, and I will now prepare a conference room paper with the help of the Secretariat. In keeping with our schedule of meetings, we'll take up agenda item 3 again to review the CRPs in the coming days. Please refer to the timeline on the Secretariat's website. You can always find the most up-to-date information on the schedule tab on the meeting webpage. So, since we have concluded this agenda item, I would like to suggest that we take a 15-minute break. Secretariat, maybe you can say when we should be back. Please don't log off. You don't need to do that. Secretariat, when should we start again?
We can start 5 minutes to 9. That's 15 minutes, 5 minutes to 9. Montreal time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice break. Distinguished delegates, I hope you all have had a nice break. We'll now continue our meeting. And before break, we concluded agenda item 3, and we will now continue agenda item 4, assessment and review effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. But before we start our discussions, I would like to remind delegates that, please, I've been said that before, but when you're making your statements, please slow down a little in order to help our interpreters to follow, and we all can also follow more easier. So please think about it. And I would also like to, once again, I have been impressed by your concise and brief statements so far, but please remember that you don't need to repeat what has been already said at the informal session. As said earlier, what has been said during informal session will be taken into account. I would also ask the Secretariat if you would like to add something before we start. Jyoti, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to remind all delegates to please upload your statements before you make them in the app that we have provided, or send them to statements@cbd.int. This helps the interpreters a lot. So please, if you could upload your statements before you speak, we would be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. I now invite delegates to consider agenda item 4 on assessment and review of effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Before we proceed with statements, kindly recall that this item was considered during our informal session on March 9, 2021. At that time, interventions were heard from 12 parties and regional groups and 3 observers, with no additional written submissions. I will now give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents on this agenda item. Secretariat, Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Article 35 of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety requires that the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, undertake a periodic evaluation of the effectiveness of the protocol. In its decision CP96, the meeting of the parties decided that the 4th assessment and review of the protocol would be combined with the final evaluation of the protocol strategic plan for the period 2011-2020. The meeting of the parties requested the Executive Secretary to analyze and synthesize information on the implementation of the protocol. It requested the Liaison Group and the Compliance Committee to contribute to the 4th assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan, and to submit their conclusions for consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation. The meeting of the parties requested the SBI to consider the information provided and the conclusions reached by the Liaison Group and the Compliance Committee, and to submit its findings and recommendations to the meeting of the parties at its 10th meeting, with a view to facilitating the 4th assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan. Document CBD SBI 3/3 provides in Section 2 an overview of the process for the 4th assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan. Section 3 contains a summary of progress under the different thematic areas of the strategic plan. Section 4 presents suggested elements for a recommendation. The conclusions from the Compliance Committee and the Liaison Group are provided in Annexes 1 and 2 respectively, and were used to develop the elements for a recommendation. The full analysis of information is provided in document CBD SBI 3/3 add 1. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for interventions on Agenda Item 4. As this item is under the Cartagena Protocol, I will give priority in the list of speakers to parties to the Cartagena Protocol. We will start though with statements by regional groups, if there are any, and followed by parties to the protocol, and then non-parties, other governments and observers. So if there is any regional group who would like to speak, could you please raise your hand? So Morocco, are you speaking on behalf of African region? And you have the floor.
Oui. Excusez-moi, je ne vais pas parler au nom du groupe africain.
I'm sorry, I am not speaking on behalf of the African group, but on behalf of Morocco, Madam Chair.
I don't hear anything.
Sorry, excuse me.
Je n'ai pas de traduction.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the interpretation.
Problem with the interpretation in the beginning. I just know a little French, but I understand that you speak on behalf of Morocco, not on the African region, right?
Right.
Yes. Then I would like to ask you to wait a little while, because first I would like to hear if there are any statements from regional groups. I open the floor for any statements from regional groups. If you could raise your hand. And Korea, are you speaking on behalf of regional group? No? Okay. There seems to be no statements. Everything was said at the informal session. That's good. So if you please continue then with the parties to the Cartagena Protocol. I now invite interventions from parties to the Cartagena Protocol. And I will start with Morocco, give you a second chance, followed by Korea and Mexico. Morocco, you have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morocco takes note of the documents prepared on the assessment of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol and thanks the Executive Secretary for the overview of the final assessment of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020 for the Cartagena Protocol and the detailed analysis of the information in the fourth national reports. The analysis of the operational objectives related to the strategic plan, which are addressed under 12 thematic areas, has highlighted the positive trends in several aspects of implementation. This in and of itself gives reason for satisfaction. Nonetheless, there are still inadequacies in several other key areas of this integrated assessment. An example of this is the limited number of countries that have put in place operational national biosafety frameworks. This circumstance is due, to a large degree, to insufficient financial resources, qualified human resources, and adequate infrastructure. And in conjunction with this, delays in implementing legal, administrative, and other measures essential to meet the obligations under the protocol. Moreover, the number of parties whose capacity building needs have been met is very limited. And national funding is often insufficient. Morocco greatly appreciates the inclusion of the biosafety target in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This provides significant leverage to continue mainstreaming biosafety in the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and in other national planning processes that are associated with those. There is an ongoing need to develop and strengthen the capacity of the parties to adequately and appropriately implement the protocol. Morocco emphasizes the support that the post-2020 Capacity Building Action Plan can bring to the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. We have benefited from numerous capacity building workshops, as have other parties. Nevertheless, we would like to receive priority support to address the challenges of operationalizing a complete national framework. It is important to set apart a biosafety section under the GEF in order to support the monitoring of the biosafety implementation plan and the post-2020 capacity building action plan. Furthermore, it is important to take advantage of the synergies through coordination and cooperation in order to mobilize additional resources targeted to biosecurity. Finally, Morocco supports the draft recommendation, particularly the paragraphs relating to additional financial and technical support, which enable countries to implement the Cartagena Protocol in the priority areas. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Morocco. And I will continue with Korea, followed by Mexico and Malaysia. Korea, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Secretariat for collecting and analyzing information for the first assessment and review of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety and the final evaluation on the strategic plan for the period 2011 to 2020. In addition, our appreciation goes to the Compliance Commission and the Liaison Group on the Cartagena Protocol for their contributions. Through the first assessment of the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol, Korea was able to identify positive factors such as increased submission of risk assessment reports, increased number of LMO information, and visitors to the BCH Central portals. However, although many first national reports must be submitted in order to accurately assess the effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol, only 120 countries have submitted their national reports so far. Therefore, Korea believes that the Secretariat needs to ask the parties to submit national reports so that as many countries as possible can submit their national reports prior to CPMOP10, and also should invite GEF or other sponsors to support the parties to prepare national reports if necessary. Regarding the establishment of national biosafety framework, we are concerned that only over half of the parties have sufficient framework for the implementation of Cartagena Protocol. It is necessary to develop the national biosafety framework for the effective implementation of Cartagena Protocol, and it is also very important to fully support capacity building on biosafety. From 2015 to 2020, Korea has supported the capacity building on risk assessment and management, LMO detection, BCH operation, and regional cooperation through the Korea Biosafety Capacity Building Initiative. Article 22 of the Cartagena Protocol provides that parties shall cooperate in the development and strengthening of capacity building on biosafety. Therefore, Korea would like to suggest inserting a relevant and proper phrase in the preamble to encourage the parties to support capacity building on biosafety. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the Republic of Korea. And we'll now continue with Mexico, followed by Malaysia and Thailand. Mexico, you have the floor.
Gracias, señora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico thanks the Secretariat for the analysis that we find in document CBD/SBI-3/3 and wishes to highlight the relevance of the following points for their consideration in the assessment of the protocol. And these were points that were raised in the fourth national report. First of all, we reaffirm the precautionary approach, which is enshrined in Principle 15, especially when it comes to the use of biotechnology that's recently been developed, including technologies and products that are produced by synthetic biology, where, due to the lack of scientific certainty about the risks involved, they need to be covered by a strict regulatory framework for biosafety purposes. Secondly, we need to promote research on socioeconomic considerations and the creation of methodological frameworks that can be included in the risk assessment so that we could take account of the social, economic and cultural impacts when it comes to decision-making processes about the imports of LMOs. We also need to strengthen the protection of genetic diversity and biocultural wealth, especially in mega-diverse countries. Thus, it is fundamental that we recognise that there's an indissoluble relationship between nature and culture, which has been established by the indigenous peoples and local communities through their practices and their world vision, which covers traditional knowledge related to the conservation and sustainable use of this biodiversity. Thirdly, strengthen pluralistic public participation in decisions related to the use of LMOs and ensure and guarantee the rights of IPLCs that are impacted by the use of these organisms, highlighting their right to free, prior and informed consent, which is also culturally appropriate. Fourthly, include the human rights-based approach in the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. Mexico is firmly convinced that this approach is a cross-cutting one for all of the themes in the convention, and it absolutely has to be considered to ensure the use of the techniques and products of modern biotechnology and ensure that the use of these does not violate the right of the population to appropriate food and health and a healthy environment. Additionally, we have some proposed changes to the recommendation that reflect what we've said in this statement, and we'll send these to the Secretariat. Finally, Mexico is happy to celebrate the participation of the international community to meet the commitments that have been made under the protocol and recognise that it is still necessary to step up efforts to fully achieve its objectives. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. And I will now continue with Malaysia, followed by Thailand and Colombia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. Malaysia has been a party to the Cartagena Protocol since 2003. It is our view that the full and effective implementation of the protocol is dependent on consistent capacity building, especially to developing countries. Therefore, the role of the post-2020 capacity building action plan for the protocol is essential to ensure that there is continuous coordination and support for implementation of the protocol. Based on our experience, capacity building needs to include the areas such as risk assessment, risk management, capacities to detect, identify, assess and monitor living modified organisms, as well as liability and redress. Providing access to sufficient financial resources and adequate technical infrastructures to parties should be facilitated and continued. Malaysia would like to take this opportunity to commend the Global Environment Facility for their assistance and urge for further support in areas such as socio-economic consideration, where local data would be required to develop its indicator. Distinguished delegates, many parties have stressed the need to ratify the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on liability and redress. For your information, Malaysia is in the process of studying the legal mechanisms that need to be put in place before ratifying the supplementary protocol. Finally, information sharing through the Biosafety Clearinghouse has proven to be very useful as a source of reference, and we urge that adequate support is provided to enable this mechanism to function to its full capacity and potential. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Malaysia. I was just about to give the floor to Thailand, but Thailand has not. If Thailand would like to speak, could you please raise your hand? No? Okay, I will then continue with Colombia, followed by South Africa and Uganda. Colombia, you have the floor. Colombia, if you activate your microphone. You have the floor.
Madam Chair, you listen me?
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Colombia welcomes the assessment and review of the effectiveness of Cartagena Protocol on biosafety, as well as the final evaluation of the strategic plan prepared by the Secretariat. Regarding the suggested elements for a recommendation included in the document PVD/SBI-3/3, Colombia has the following specific modifications. First, in paragraph 2, we recommended replacing the word "can" by "should," bearing in mind that the draft of DVF contains references about biosafety. For this reason, we propose this modification with the view of articulating all the actions of Cartagena Protocol within new framework. Second, in paragraph 5, we need to mobilize resources from all available national and international sources. Therefore, Colombia requests the following inclusion. Suggests parties to allocate the necessary resources. Here goes the inclusion from all sources, including international cooperation and private sector, and continue with the paragraph. Third, in paragraph 12, taking into account that the GEF is the financial mechanism of the convention and its protocols, we consider that using the word invite does not represent the urgency and the importance of a stronger resource mobilization for biosafety. Furthermore, the analysis presented in the Word documents identified that one of the main causes of the implementation problem of Cartagena Protocol is the lack of access to additional resources different to the national budgets. In this sense, we suggest replacing invite by request. In this paragraph, we also suggest including in the list of priority areas a reference about developing countries' need for financial support for the elaboration of national reports. Finally, Madam Chair, we have some additional proposals for text modifications to Annex 1 in paragraph 5 and Annex 2 in paragraph 2 and 7 regarding the focus of the discussion, where we consider that it should remain on living modified organisms and on their generation of scientific sound risk assessments. Then the focus should not be on the technologies used to obtain LMOs. Madam Chair, we will submit these proposals in writing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I will now give the floor to South Africa, followed by Uganda and Guatemala. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. South Africa welcomes the note prepared by the Secretariat on this agenda item. South Africa takes note of the analysis of information for the fourth assessment and review of the protocol and the final evaluation of the strategic plan. And we are of the view that the results of the analysis are useful and will assist parties in strengthening the follow-up implementation plan of the Cartagena Protocol. South Africa also welcomes the inputs provided by the Compliance Committee at its 17th meeting and the Liaison Group.
South Africa also welcomes the input provided by the Compliant Committee in this regard. South Africa also supports the request to the Executive Secretariat to provide an update to the analysis, considering if there will be any further information that will be provided on the fourth national reports as an additional report that will be submitted, and make this available to the COPMOP team. With regard to the analysis done on the progress by the parties towards the operational objective of the strategic plan on the 12 thematic areas, South Africa would like to make the following intervention. We are of the view, Madam Chair, that national biosafety framework are critical for the as an implementation tool of the biosafety protocol at a national level. And we are, however, deeply concerned that paragraph 25 of document CBD SBI-3 Addendum 1 has cited difficulties faced by some parties in adopting the legal, administrative, and other measures to implement the protocol. Therefore, we urge parties to make efforts on mainstreaming biosafety across a variety of sectoral and cross-sectoral policy and legal instruments, including in their NBSAP. We also urge parties and invite other governments and donors to make resources available to support parties in their efforts to strengthen the capacity for effective implementation of the national biosafety frameworks. Madam Chair, coordination and support is also an integral part of the implementation of the protocol, and South Africa notes with concern the lack of progress in meeting capacity building needs in most of the region. We therefore agree with the conclusion of the Leiden Group on the need for developing and strengthening the capacity of parties to implement the protocol. We also recognize the facilitative role the post-2020 capacity building action plan for the protocol can play in this regard. South Africa notes with concern that implementation of the protocol continues to compete with the biodiversity in relation to the GEF financial support, and therefore we also support Morocco's proposal to have a dedicated GEF window on enhancing implementation. We also invite the GEF to take note of the challenges that parties are encountering in accessing.
I think we lost South Africa. I think South Africa was just about to conclude. If I will continue now with Uganda, followed by Guatemala and Brazil. And if South Africa would like to come back and conclude, you can raise your hand. Uganda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Uganda still regards the submission made on made during the informal sessions on this agenda item, which overall supports the elements of the draft recommendations. However, we've made some improvements on a submission regarding the coordination and support. And Uganda notes that capacity building on biosafety is unique and has a number of components relating to infrastructure, technology, and scientific cooperation, as well as human capital development. It is therefore important to note that modern biotechnology is developing at a very high rate compared with the capacity for its regulation, especially in developing countries. There is therefore a need for capacity building on new and emerging technologies, specifically synthetic biology, gene editing technologies, and gene-derived techniques, including their risk assessment and management related to these technologies. And finally, Madam Chair, Uganda supports the submission made by Morocco on deliberate financing and capacity building options for the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uganda. And I now give the floor to Guatemala, followed by Brazil. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to say that we fully support what Mexico has said. Guatemala is also a mega diverse country, especially for various plants, and we'd like to talk about certain actions that we're doing nationally to try and generate the basis for implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. We're implementing a GEF project to reach full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol. And we're dealing with capacity building and detection and awareness raising and participation of society and education and training about the technology, and also actions about redress and liability, and also dealing with socioeconomic considerations. In order to reach full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol, we need to count on GEF and international cooperation for sustainable development. They need to continue with their support. It's also important to point out that it's very important to develop regional agreements so that we can encourage the approval of regulations to reduce the use of LMOs. We're approving regulations with an agreement between Guatemala and Honduras. And this is helping us to develop various actions to improve implementation of the Cartagena Protocol in our country. Finally, in the post-2020 framework, we need to have targets and indicators that are clear, that reflect the needs to have full implementation of the Cartagena Protocol in the next decade to come. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Guatemala. And finally on my list for parties to the Cartagena Protocol is Brazil. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, once again. As we had the chance to state previously, Brazil welcomes the comprehensive analysis on the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol presented in document SBI-3/3. At the same time, Brazil remains concerned over the lack of progress in addressing capacity building needs and gaps. Regarding recommendations on risk assessment and risk management in paragraph 15 of section C, Brazil understands that we must emphasize the importance of compliance with Annex 3 of the protocol, which remains the major framework to identify and evaluate the potential adverse effects of living modified organisms. Furthermore, reference to additional guidance materials must highlight their voluntary nature. With reference to section D on LMOs or traits that may have adverse effects, Brazil believes that the corresponding recommendations should be based on the framework provided by Article 16 of the Protocol. In this regard, it is essential to emphasize the need to strengthen cooperation among parties in line with Article 16.5. We should also bear in mind that Article 16 does not address detecting or monitoring activities. Moreover, regarding Section G on socioeconomic considerations, Brazil understands that a more flexible language is needed in paragraph 25 in order to recognize the voluntary nature of obligations under Article 26 of the Protocol and consider different national circumstances and capabilities. In addition, data about specific approaches or requirements to facilitate socioeconomic considerations in decision-making needs to be carefully reviewed. Brazil would like to express its concern that some references and methodologies presented in the last meeting of the ATAG on socioeconomic considerations were not aligned with the scope of Article 26. Therefore, from Brazil's perspective, there is still insufficient information on the uptake of specific approaches or requirements by parties. Finally, regarding the section on outreach and cooperation, Brazil would suggest adding a paragraph encouraging parties to provide support for the effective participation in biotechnological research activities, especially for developing countries, and promote on a fair and equitable basis access to the results and benefits arising from those biotechnologies in accordance with Article 19 of the Convention. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. And I now see that South Africa is back again. Maybe if you would like to conclude your statement, since we lost you. South Africa, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to conclude on our statement, South Africa notes with concern that the implementation of the protocol continues to compete with biodiversity in relation to the GEF financial support. We also invite the GEF to take note of the challenges that parties are encountering in accessing the funds as outlined in paragraph 46 of this document. South Africa supports the suggested recommendations on risk assessment and risk management, and in terms of paragraph 16 of the suggested recommendation, we have made some slight adjustment just to make sure that it includes engineered gene drive organisms. Madam Chair, in terms of the supplementary protocol, South Africa is of the view that the outcomes of the study will further assist parties to the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety that have not yet ratified the supplementary protocol to fast-track their ratification processes. Madam Chair, finally, South Africa notes issues raised by the Compliance Committee that needs to be taken into account in the follow-up strategic plan, in particular, the considerable variation in progress on indicators related to parties' compliance with key obligations under the protocol, the limited progress reported by parties in areas such as compliance with the obligation to take the necessary legal, administrative, and other measures to implement the protocol, and timely submission of national reports. The continued lack of funding to support parties in addressing their compliance issues, and also the lack of priority accorded to biosafety. In conclusion, South Africa reiterates the importance of addressing biosafety in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and support the committee's view that reference to the implementation plan for the Cartagena Protocol and the capacity building action plan should be included in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, recognizing that the protocol can be relevant to the achievement of the three objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity. South Africa is of the view that the biosafety target in the global biodiversity framework should be aligned to Article 8G of the CBD to allow for technological uptake by parties to support economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. And I see no more requests from parties to the Cartagena Protocol for the floor. I will now open the floor for intervention by non-parties. I see no requests from floor from non-parties, so I open the floor for intervention by other governments. I see no request for the floor. So we will now move on to interventions from organizations, beginning with major groups. If there are any who will speak on behalf of major group, you can please raise your hand. Yes, I think that it is Women NGO Farm. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Ana Di Pangracio and I'm speaking on behalf of the Women's Caucus. On this agenda item and relating to document SBI-3/3, as a general recommendation, we indicate that monitoring elements should consider the mainstreaming of gender through the work of the Cartagena Protocol. We have a series of specific recommendations. They are the following. On Section A, National Biosafety Frameworks, we recommend adding new text as an additional para, which would read as follows. Urges parties to consider mainstreaming of gender in their national biosafety action plans. On Section B, Coordination and Support, paragraph 8, it would read, recognizes the importance of coordination among relevant authorities, relevant stakeholders, and we add, including indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and to various levels, and of mainstreaming biodiversity for advancing, biosafety, for advancing implementation of the protocol. On Section G, Socioeconomic considerations, para 25, it would read, encourages parties to exchange research and information on socioeconomic considerations, to support parties in taking into account socioeconomic considerations, and here we add the impacts on women, including in identifying gender-responsive indicators to complement it, including impacts on cultures and traditional knowledge, and it ends in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 1 of the protocol. And finally, on section L, outreach and cooperation, paragraph 42 would read, stresses the importance of cooperation among parties and to relevant stakeholders, and here we add including indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and it would read in addition to cooperation among intergovernmental organizations to support the implementation of the protocol. We have also made these submissions to the online portal and hope for parties' support to our recommendations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, women. And I will now give the floor to IPLCs. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is made on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. IPBES recognizes the central role of indigenous peoples and local communities in achieving the objectives of the Convention and its protocols. However, as we have noted in our statement delivered during the informal session, we are concerned with the limited progress made in the implementation of the strategic plan for the Cartagena Protocol and the gaps of ensuring the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation at the national level to ensure that our indigenous and local knowledge, innovations, practices, and technologies are taken into account in the risk assessment and risk management, socioeconomic, cultural, and ethical issues are considered in decision-making, and our free, prior, and informed consent is sought before the introduction of living modified organisms in our lands, waters, and territories. We propose the following text changes in the suggested recommendations for consideration by the parties. On paragraph 16, after human resource capacities, to insert incorporating indigenous and local knowledge, innovations, practices, and technologies into account, and the rest of the paragraph goes on. In paragraph 25, after socioeconomic considerations, especially on indigenous peoples and local communities, in accordance with Article 26, paragraph 2 of the protocol. Finally, we would like to propose an additional paragraph 25bis that would read, encourages parties to make use of the guidance on the assessment of socioeconomic considerations in the context of Article 26 of the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. And I see no more requests from the major stakeholders, so I will now invite observers to take the floor. As was the case of parties, I will request those organizations that took the floor during our March informal meetings to refrain from doing so now, unless essential to bring new issues to our attention. Rest assured that the statements made in March are available to be taken into account by parties. So I will take the first intervention from IRSS again. You had the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Abdoulaye Diabaté, researcher at the Institut de Recherche en Sciences de la Santé in Burkina Faso, a member of the Target Malaria Not-for-Profit Research Consortium, developing new genetic technology for controlling malaria mosquitoes in Africa. We are a member of the Outreach Network for Gene Drive Research, and I'm speaking on behalf of the network. I would like to address item 4 and 5 of the SBI agenda. It is important that the post-2020 framework places strong emphasis on the implementation of the Cartagena Protocol by signatory countries. Lack of capacity to implement the protocol hinders the ability of countries to participate in and benefit from advances in research, including new genetic approaches for the control of vector-borne disease and for the management of invasive alien species. We have learned from the pandemic the importance of research and innovation in delivering life-saving solutions. To ensure new tools and technologies meet the needs and priorities of different countries, researchers from this country must be part of the research process, from setting priorities through all the R&D stages. If countries do not have in place effective biosafety frameworks, their experts and researchers are left out of some of the most dynamic and promising field of research. Implementing the Cartagena Protocol by building capacity and facilitating the exchange of information and experience is an area where the CBD can play a key role. As noted during the discussion on post-2020 under Substa, there must be coherence across the different elements of the framework, and support for Cartagena implementation should be framed as an enabling tool for biosafety, but also for innovation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I will continue with Third World Network. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We continue to believe that formal virtual negotiations disadvantage most developing countries and civil society, particularly IPLCs, small farmers, women and youth, adding to inequities in multilateral negotiations and other global injustices. However, we participate in good faith to amplify the voices of the disadvantaged. The issues we raised at the informal session remain valid. The following are additional points. The Cartagena Protocol on biosafety remains the sole international legally binding agreement that specifically regulates LMOs. Yet, its implementation is regrettably still lacking. We call on parties to adopt and implement the implementation plan and capacity building action plan with urgency, and to effectively implement the protocol and comply with their obligations through biosafety legislation based on the precautionary principle. LMOs continue to pose risks with new genetic techniques such as genome editing, synthetic biology, and engineered gene drives increasing the threats. Guidance on risk assessment and socioeconomic considerations has been developed under the protocol in accordance with Annex 3 and Article 26 respectively, and is also applicable to these new techniques. We urge parties to use the guidance on risk assessment and risk management and the guidance on socioeconomic considerations, including for capacity building purposes. The Cartagena Protocol further clearly governs these new technologies, but work has to be done to make it fit for the challenge of governing them stringently and to coordinate with the CBD, which maintains overall oversight. Madam Chair, too often the principle of prior informed consent has been ignored, despite it being a cornerstone of the protocol. It is not enough for parties to have their advance informed agreement sought, but the free, prior, and informed consent of potentially affected IPLCs also needs to be obtained. Much more effort is needed to ensure the right of citizens, particularly of IPLCs, smallholder farmers, women and youth, to fully, meaningfully, and effectively participate in decision-making. Finally, we are concerned with the lack of implementation of liability and redress rules. We urge parties to ratify the supplementary protocol and to apply or develop civil liability rules and procedures at the domestic level. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think you're muted.
Sorry. I was just saying that I see no more requests for the floor, and thank you, delegates, for sharing your views. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussion on agenda item 4, assessment and review of effectiveness of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. I see that we have a lot of common understanding on the draft recommendation, and I will now prepare a conference room paper with the help of the Secretariat. So please refer to a post timeline in the annex to the scenario note to this session, as well as the scenario Secretariat website. Let us now turn to next agenda item if we have time. I hope we can continue. I now invite delegates to turn to agenda item 5 on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Distinguished delegates, as I have indicated in the scenario note prepared for this session, Agenda Item 5 will be organized as follows. I will open the agenda item now and request the co-chairs to provide the meeting with a background on their request and expectations from the SBI, and then I will adjourn the agenda item. Parties may wish to keep expectation of the co-chairs in mind while deliberating on agenda items related to post-2020. I will open the floor during the second plenary session for comments on issues listed under paragraph 25A to D in the scenario note. A CRP for agenda item 5 on issues listed under paragraph 25A to D will be considered during the third plenary. I will forward the relevant advice, once considered by the meeting, to the co-chairs for their consideration. So, I would now like to invite the co-chairs of the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, Mrs. Frances Ogwell of Uganda and Mrs. Basil van Haar of Canada, to provide an overview of their expectations and any requests they may have. They will provide us with background information on their request and the expectations from the SBI. And as said, I think this introduction will help delegation to consider the questions contained in the annex during the statements under the relevant agenda items. So, co-chairs, you have the floor. I don't know which one will start, but...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will start, and Francis will join me in a minute. Colleagues, it's a pleasure to address you today, and we would like to bring to your attention some points directly related to the SBI agenda, and some others that are providing you with a broader context on the work we're doing to prepare Draft 1. First, the SBI-3 agenda includes many points that are critical for the development of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We have discussed this with the SBI Chair and the Secretariat, and have concluded that it would be most efficient to avoid duplication in discussion. As such, we recommend that you have the discussion on issue related to this agenda item and the post-2020 framework under the relevant agenda item, as noted in the scenario note. In order to help ensure that you have covered all the elements that are important for the refining of the updated Zero Draft GBF, we have created a list of questions that was circulated a few months ago. We do not expect those to be answered one by one, but rather that you use them as a checklist to enable and ensure that all issues are covered during the discussion, as well as in the Chair's report. Second, some SBI agenda items, like resource mobilization and mainstreaming, are directly related to goals and targets. Others, like planning, reporting, and review, are not. Yet, they are important and necessary elements and will be captured in the GBF at a high level. There is two reasons for this. First, keep in mind that we are proposing for the GBF to be a framework for all. This means that language should be generic enough to be applicable well beyond the CBD. Remember that we're trying to create a framework for all. The second reason is to allow for updates and evolution throughout the 10-year period through the COP decisions. There is no doubt that parties will want to keep those two considerations, what will be in the GBF and what will be in the COP decision, in mind through the open-ended working group deliberation to ensure coherence and completeness. I will now pass the floor to Francis, who will deliver the second half. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Do you hear me over there? Yeah, my camera, I'm not sure whether it will come on. But just to say that I'll just make some few additions to what Co-Chair has just said. And this is in regard to implementation of the framework, which we expect, of course, once adopted at COP15, that should be something that we should be seeing happening in earnest. So we therefore would like you to discuss those issues, taking into account the experiences and lessons that we've learned during the implementation of the strategic plan for biodiversity 2011-2020, so that we avoid doing things in the business as usual manner. We've heard, and we heard a lot during the regional consultation, that is not going to take us anywhere, approaching things in the business as usual. So in the post-2020, we need to be thinking how we are going to do things differently. And finally, we are impressed, of course, by the amount of work that you, the participants, have so far exhibited during the SABSTA meetings, and we trust that this is going to continue even during the SBI meeting. We will be preparing a draft one, taking into account considerations of the outcomes of this meeting. So these two meetings are very important for us as co-chairs. You just heard the chair saying that actually they're going to give us a report on which we are going to base on to improve the updated zero draft. So take this very seriously. We are taking our notes, and we think that we should be able to do a good job. We are listening in from start to the end. So we'll be working with you and the Bureau and the Secretariat closely as we move towards the finalization of this GBF post-2020, and therefore also looking at how the other processes ahead of us we can best participate in. You know that still we have the third meeting of the working group coming up. There are a number of those processes still happening. So we are looking forward really to continue to work with you. And thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, co-chairs, for this informative introduction. It's very helpful. I am confident that it will help advance our discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and ensure that SBI provides the best input possible to your work. Thank you very much. I now adjourn this agenda item 5, till 28th of May. Distinguished delegates, that brings us to the end of our SBI plenary meeting for today. We will reconvene the SBI plenary tomorrow at 7 a.m. Montreal time, starting with agenda item 6 on resource mobilization and financial mechanism. Before closing, I would like to remind all parties and observers that the survey on indicators initiated by the co-chairs of a contact group on item 3 under SABSTA is due to close tomorrow, Monday, 17th May. A notification on the survey was circulated last week. On behalf of the SABSTA chair and the Secretariat, I would like to encourage all parties and observers that have not yet done so to complete the survey during today or tomorrow. Secretariat, any more information before I close for today? No? So thank you very much. Thank you all for all good work today. A very good start on this SBI-3 meeting. I'm looking forward to continuous discussions the coming days. But this meeting of SBI plenary is now closed. Thank you.